Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Immigration Nation. I'm your host today. My name is Kleine, and I'm here with Deirdre. She's based out of Florida. We're so excited to have her here today. Deirdre, go ahead and tell us what we're going to be talking about today, a little bit about your firm. Give us the scoop.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deirdre Nero. I am the owner of Nero Immigration Law, which is an immigration law boutique based out of Miami, Florida. I've been practicing immigration law for 20 years. I can't believe it. I feel very old every time I say that. And I started my law firm 15 years ago. We're having our actual 15-year anniversary next month. So that's
Congratulations.
Really exciting. Yeah, we're going to throw a party and everything. So that's fun. Time flies. I can't believe it. Every time I say that, I'm like, how is it possible?
That's so cool. 15 years.
Yeah, wow. 15 years on my own, 20 practicing. I went to my 20-year law school reunion recently, and I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, how's that?
It does fly by. It's so funny. When I was little, my mother always used to say to me, you're going to blink your eyes, and before you know it, you're going to be old. And I would just laugh at her. And then now, as I'm aging, I'm like, oh gosh, mom is always right about everything, basically. Because it's so true, and that's how I feel. But so the firm is, like I said, an immigration boutique. We focus primarily on what we call business and employment immigration, which is kind of our sweet spot. But we also do, all kinds of immigration law, mostly on what we call the benefits side. So helping people proactively apply for a benefit like a visa, a green card, citizenship, work permits, travel permits, all the things that you have to affirmatively apply for, is more where we're kind of centered in terms of our practice area. We don't really handle asylums or deportation defense, but we run kind of the gamut of the rest of the immigration services that any foreign national or company that is dealing with foreign nationals could probably need. And I thought today it would be really interesting to talk about what we call employer immigration compliance. So that's kind of what I was thinking would be a nice topic for us to chat about, Kleine.
Sweet. And you guys are the best of the best. They're the firm to look for in Miami. We're so excited to have them here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We try. We try.
Well, let's just jump right into it. So, like Deirdre said, they are all about the proactive and the beneficial side of, kind of this business immigration aspect. So, be that as it may, let's jump right into it. What is it? What is employer immigration compliance, and who does it apply to?
You worded it that way, because actually employer immigration compliance is kind of one of the things that does have like a defensive component that we do here at the firm. Which is funny because I'm always saying, oh yeah, we're all about like affirmatively applying for things. But the employer immigration compliance has kind of a defensive aspect and an affirmative aspect. So what is the employer immigration compliance? Like basically that's a very broad term that encompasses helping companies and employers stay in compliance with immigration law. And the cool thing that I like about employer immigration compliance practice is that you can really help a really wide array of employers around the United States that have any employees on payroll need to worry about employer immigration compliance. Even if they don't have a single foreign national working for them, every single person that works for them is a U.S. citizen, which, in today's day and age is becoming less and less common. But, it's possible that a company has only U.S. citizen employees just, by coincidence. Those companies have to comply with the same regulations. And a lot of times they don't understand that. Bigger companies tend to know a lot about this stuff because they tend to have like a whole department dedicated to dealing with this stuff. And typically it's just part of compliance. Like HR. Yeah, well, typically it's kind of falls under like an HR type role at larger companies. So what we find, at least what I find at my practice, is that a lot of times it's smaller and medium companies that are really kind of needing a lot more education on this topic and needing a lot more help on this topic. And then during the pandemic, we kind of started talking about other things that were more kind of urgent and timely relating to travel bans and all that stuff. But now that we're kind of on the other side, thank God, of the pandemic, we're starting to look at this topic a lot more closely again, and trying to educate the community, but then also helping employers, not just with learning what they need to know and training their teams on what they need to know and how to handle this stuff properly.
For sure.
But then also if they get in trouble, and that's where the defensive side comes in, if they get in trouble, helping them out of the trouble, hopefully.
Oh, that makes sense.
Helping them negotiate any fines that they might be facing. So basically, when we talk about employer immigration, we're talking about I-9 compliance. I-9, if you've ever been employed at a company, you've hopefully filled out an I-9. That is the form that you're filling out within the first 3 days of working, that an employer basically has to confirm the identity of the person they're hiring and that the person is authorized to work in the United States.
Gotcha.
So that's Form I-9, and it needs to be done right at the beginning. So when a new employee is being onboarded, the employee is supposed to fill out their part on their first day of work for pay, or before they even start, if they've already kind of accepted the offer and they know that they're starting on X date, they can fill out their portion, the day before or whatever. But by the end of the first day of work for pay, and then the employer is supposed to fill out their portion and verify the documents of the employee by the end of the third day of work for pay. And those are business days, and business day of the company, right? So that's another thing that I teach employers is like, not every company has counts business days the same way. Like a hospital is open 24/7, 365. So a hospital is going to count every day as a business day, whereas like a law firm or, something that's like an office style, kind of company is probably only going to count Monday through Friday as business days, because that's the only days that they're actually open and operational. So that's one component of employer immigration compliance. Another component, which is kind of like a hot topic in Florida, where my firm is located right now in particular, but nationwide is always something that we're talking about, is E-Verify, which is basically an online system for checking the employee's identity and work authorization. But something that confuses a lot of employers is that it doesn't replace I-9. It's in addition to I-9. I-9 is mandatory for every single company that has any employees on payroll, unless it's just the owner. So if it's like you own the company and you're the only employee, you don't have to I-9 yourself. But that's kind of like the only exception. So I-9 is like across the board. E-Verify, on the other hand, is in many states voluntary, but in some states it's mandatory. And then in other states, it's like voluntary in some situations and mandatory in other situations. So that's something that we work with a lot with employers. And then the third component is kind of immigration-related discrimination. And that also falls under kind of this whole employer immigration compliance.
Gotcha.
And that's like, a lot of that has to do with like the way that you conduct your I-9 and your E-Verify. You can't do it in a discriminatory way.
Right.
But then there's also things with like the hiring practice, like the way you advertise a job. Like, are you able to say like, we only hire US citizens? Like, no, but in some very limited circumstances, you can do that, but it's like ultra limited, right? And there's like a lot of rules that prevent employers from discriminating against potential and current employees due to their immigration status or their nationality or their citizenship. So those are that's employer immigration compliance, and that's one of the many things that we do at our firm. And it's something that I'd like to talk about a lot because I feel like there's a lack of knowledge on that topic in particular.
Yeah, no, you have completely broadened my perspective about this whole thing. I thought it was just get your I-9 in and we're good to go. We'll help you
Yeah.
fill out the forms. But no, it's on the offense, it's on the defense, like
Yeah.
everything you've just said and probably more that we won't even be able to touch on.
And also, there's kind of always some little new thing
For
happening.
sure.
At the end of last year, we had a new form come out that made a lot of changes, right? And there were a lot of like new things that employers need to learn around the new form. And then there was also like a new process that came out for actually checking documents.
It's always something.
So then we started again, like, okay,
Yeah.
let's re-educate and let's teach the new stuff and teach, when you can use the new procedures, when you can't, all of that. And then also being in Florida last year, Florida passed mandatory e-verify for companies that have at least 25 employees.
Gotcha.
So that then created a whole other conversation, sub conversation in the employer immigration compliance space about e-verify and mandatory e-verify in Florida in particular, but then also just e-verify in general, because some of the new procedures that they put out for verifying documents for the I-9. And when I say documents, I mean the identity documents of an employee. So passport, driver's license, green card, whatever they're using as their identity document. And then the document that they show to prove that they have working authorization in the US. So that can also be their passport, their green card, their work permit, but it can be something else as well, depending on the immigration status of the individual and how they're authorized to work. And there's actually like a chart that shows you all of the potential kind of combinations of documents. And employers are tasked with actually like inspecting that documentation. And so they came out with like this alternate procedure that there's a digital way to do it, which was never kind of like an across the board thing. But they said that you have to be doing e-verify. You have to be an employer that uses e-verify. So that whole conversation kind of came along around the same time that Florida passed mandatory e-verify. So we've been talking about this stuff a lot, at least in my neck of the woods, but also kind of across the country because of the alternate procedures that they put out for companies that use e-verify in all states, right? That's not specific to Florida.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure being in South Florida and Miami specifically, there is just so much stuff going on. So I'm sure, with all this employee compliance stuff, and the new changes coming out, there's just so much to do. But in the scope of all of this, like how long does all of this take for you guys to, go in there and like maybe prepare for an audit and to like teach how long does that take and how long does the actual like if the government were to come and do that, like what's the timeline looking like and what is also
That's a good question
that comes with that?
So a lot of that is going to depend on the size of the company, right? Like obviously I can do an internal audit on a small company a lot faster than I can do it on like a larger company. Because in theory, you're going to have an I-9 for every employee. And then you're also going to have I-9s maybe for employees that are not working there anymore, but are still within like the retention period of how long the employers need to keep the I-9. So it really depends on the size of the company, how long it's going to take. But also, depending on how much they want to pay me, I'm happy to dedicate, large swaths of time at a time there. Or, maybe I only visit them periodically. I think that depends on the needs of the company. When you're talking about a proactive, like, let's go in and train your people and get your ducks in a row, because hopefully we're not like under the gun of an audit where, we can kind of do it at our own pace and at the employer's pace. Unfortunately, if there is an audit, then we will have a set timeline. We will have, to produce the documents only a couple of days. And then a lot of times you'll get an opportunity to correct mistakes. And then we'll have a set time frame for that. And then typically, if there's a final kind of after you do any corrections that they let you do, then they give you kind of like a final notice, like this is what we're going to fine you. And then, typically what an attorney will do at that point is within typically like a 30-day period, put the government on notice that we would like to appeal that. And that usually is what sets off negotiations. Because, well, I don't really want to go to court and like do anything in court, to be honest with you.
Right.
I'm not a court person. But we usually say that, we want a hearing basically on this topic. And then that is what then instigates the negotiations. And so typically then the government attorney will reach out to myself or whoever the attorney is on this matter and start negotiating. And the idea is that we try to bring down the fines as much as we can for an employer. And we also try to get them like a longer time frame to pay it back. Right. So if I can take the fine that they said is your fine, I can decrease it by, a certain percentage. And then I can also get the payment terms spread out over, a long period of time. It's going to be a lot less painful for the employer and a lot less likely to put them out of business if, do those things for them. So that's kind of the idea behind it. If you're getting audited, though, it's going to be very low chance that you get away with no penalties and no fines unless you have been very proactive in kind of doing your internal audits and making sure that you're doing everything the right way. Then you might be able to get lucky there and have, no fines or like very minimal fines, but
yeah,
the less you pay attention to this stuff beforehand, the more likely it is that there's going to be kind of significant penalties on the other end if you were to get in trouble. So they're kind of like built-in timelines depending on what you're doing in terms of like when you're in the audit side, like which stage of that you're at. When you're in the proactive side, there really isn't a timeline, like no time like the present is my kind of theory on that, because you don't know when a government official is going to walk through the front doors of your company and basically subpoena your records, right? Like
better safe than sorry on that front.
Yeah. Also, there are certain, I feel like, industries that maybe have like a little bit more of an eye on them because they just historically have higher levels of non-compliance or of unauthorized people that tend to work for those companies. Also, there is kind of the feeling that if you are participating in E-Verify, you're almost like subjecting your company to like a real-time audit because that does get submitted to the government. So like, whereas I-9s, you're supposed to file them correctly and maintain them correctly, and keep them in compliance with the law in case you get audited. The E-Verify is something that's submitted online in like real time, right? And it's submitted to the government. So the government is like looking at that stuff. So I'm expecting now, especially like in Florida, now that E-Verify has become mandatory for companies 25 and higher, that the number of I-9 audits is going to increase based on what they're seeing off of the E-Verify.
Okay, so I have one more question for you. Like, what does success look like for those people? Like, do you have like a success story that you like, this is what you tell people, like, here's, like this person was doing something wrong, but we were able to save it in time. Like maybe
I have a couple of success stories like that. I mean, we definitely have had several companies that, we did internal audits for them. Later, they did end up getting audited and it like wasn't that bad. It was good. A few little things here and there, like really low fines that then they ended up just kind of, taking care of very easily. And it was like a non-event type of thing. But that's because they had really been like ultra proactive beforehand. But unfortunately, I have only, much fewer of those kinds of stories. I have a lot more stories on the other side, which is like an employer coming to me once they're already being audited and it was like really bad. But success on that end looks like, we were able to mitigate the fine by like, 30, 40%. And get it spaced out over, 5 years time to repay it. And so at least, look, you still are going to have to pay something but at least it's not putting your company in a position that you're going to go bankrupt trying to do that, right? So
For sure. But what's been like the highest fine that you've seen?
oh gosh, I mean, hundreds of thousands on small
What?
company with like 20, 30 people, and it was like several $100,000 fine. It can be like really bad.
Oh my God, people
Yeah,
reach
like
out today.
it's pretty bad. I mean, it can be pretty bad, especially if you're like an egregious violator. But there's also like levels of fines, right? Like if it's like simple paperwork violations and things like the fines aren't as high. But then if they have like reason to believe that you're like knowingly hiring people that are not authorized to work, or that you're like falsifying documents, then it gets progressively worse. And in the state of Florida, you have to use E-Verify, mandatory. Like that is the law right now. So if you're not doing that right now, you're breaking the law. However, they haven't started actually doing the penalized yet, and they're going to start that this summer. So we'll see how bad that looks. But my, recommendation is that you start figuring that out now, because it's already past time. Like this went into effect in July, and it's going to start being penalized in July of this year. So, if you haven't figured this out already yet, and you're going to fall under the scope of that law, you need to figure that out now, basically. And then that will lend to, in my opinion, looking also at your I-9 practices and everything, because everything is kind of connected, right? So it's a good opportunity to kind of look at your entire employer immigration compliance situation at your company and how it's being handled, and what are your policies and how are you doing it now, and like really kind of look at whether you need some revamping there, or whether you even have a policy. Maybe you need to institute a policy because you don't have one at all, right? And so we can come in and kind of help in that regard, not only with looking at what you're doing now, but also then helping you come up with a policy going forward that's going to set your company up for success, put you in the best position to avoid being penalized and having to pay all those fines and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our listeners out there, please reach out to Deirdre. It's www.neroimmigration.com. She's in Florida, but I'm sure she will answer any calls or requests outside of the state.
We practice nationwide, which is really fun with immigration law, because immigration law is federal law. I mean, outside of some of these like state-specific rules, it's federal law. So we are able to practice in every state, which is awesome, because I get to have clients from all over. And you see my background is New York, and everyone says, "Oh, are you in New York?" I'm like, "Oh, I wish." No, I'm in Northeastern, so I love New York. But the Statue of Liberty is kind of like our law firm mascot. So that's the background.
I love it. Do you have any parting words or any like last closing statements you want to share with our listeners?
I mean, I just would love for you guys to follow us on social. We have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. It's at Nero Immigration. You can find me, Deirdre Nero, on LinkedIn personally as well, and on Facebook and Instagram personally as well, in addition to the law firm channels. And our phone number is 305-351-1079. And you see up there on the screen our website. That Kleine already told you. So I'd be more than happy, to speak with you and answer questions that you might have about anything we talked about today or anything else immigration related. And I wish you guys a lot of luck. I am so happy that I got to do this, Kleine. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. You've been awesome.
Thanks.
Yay. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening.
This podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and is not legal advice. This information is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute an attorney-client relationship.